All right, man, peace. So you know what, brothers, when you look through the NBA's history, there are always going to be great players that I call casualties of their era, meaning transcendent superlative athletes, great basketball players who are just unfortunate enough to participate in an era where there are dynastic teams. In the 60s, you had Jerry West, Elgin Baylor, Oscar Robertson. They were unable to win in that era because of Bill Russell and the Celtics. And fortunately for Oscar and Jerry, they were both able to cherry-pick championships in the early 70s. In the 80s, you had great players like Alex English, George Gervin, who were unable to win, Dominique Wilkins, because they could never get past Magic, Bird, Dr. J, or Isaiah Thomas. In the 90s, of course, you had Patrick Ewing, Reggie Miller, Karl Malone, John Stockton, who were unable to get past Jordan, Charles Barkley as well. In the 2000s, you had Vince Carter, Tracy McGrady, Allen Iverson, Chris Webber, who could just not find a way to beat Shaq and Kobe or Tim Duncan. And of course, now in the 2010s, you have the great Chris Paul. Now, Chris Paul, like every great hero, if you ever read Greek or Roman mythology, every great quote-unquote hero has what they call an Achilles heel, which pretty much set up the paradigm for a lot of the comic book characters like Superman, who has the Achilles heel of kryptonite. Chris Paul's Achilles heel is that he wants to win so bad that he experiences such a high level of anxiety that he starts to make mistakes that he normally would not make. And that is the clear distinction, the clear separation between him and Isaiah Thomas. And of course, this season, they were on the verge of defeating the Golden State Warriors. They were up 3-2 when Chris Paul went down with a very debilitating hamstring injury. We all knew that he was not going to be able to come back from that. Once you get a bad hammy, you're done. So the question on the lips of many of the supporters of the Houston Rockets and the prognosticators who predicted that they were going to win the championship is whether or not the Rockets would have won had they had Chris Paul. And the reason why this question is so important is because it could determine whether or not Chris Paul decides to re-sign back with the Houston Rockets during this offseason. So, of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
For SportsCenter right now, I'm Victoria Arlen. Even without Chris Paul on the court, Rockets general manager Daryl Morey said, "We should have won tonight." Could Paul have helped prevent those 27 straight missed threes? Guard Eric Gordon thinks so.
And it sucks because you know you could win this series if we just had one more playmaker, just than Chris, if he was out there.
Right, but you know what, brother? When you go 0 for 27 from three-point land, you really can't blame Chris Paul because you guys had a lot of wide-open three-point shots. And at the end of the day, you really should have been happy that Andre Iguodala went down. Because I agree with Steve Kerr. I believe that had Andre Iguodala not gone down, you guys would have went down in 5 games. No more than 5 games.
We've been playing on Thursday.
How painful is it to say if you had Chris, you know you'd be playing on Thursday?
No question, it's tough. I mean, you can see it. You can easily see it. And
well, sometimes you can see things that you can't grab.
that's a good team over there, and it's just tough.
The Rockets enter the offseason with a number of decisions to make.
Now, this is their real problem right here. I don't believe that they're going to be able to re-sign Clint Capella. But then again, they can offer him almost $30 million, so it's going to be up to Capella whether or not he wants to come back. And then there's the looming specter of Mr. LeBron James. Does he want to take his talents to the Rockets? Who knows? Chris Paul is going to demand the max, so we'll see what happens. Either way, I think that next season is going to be their best opportunity to beat Golden State. If they don't beat them next year, they never will.
The team has 8 free agents, including Chris Paul and Clint Capella, both of whom earned big raises with their performances this season. And don't look to the draft for help. The Rockets have just 1 pick in the upcoming NBA draft.
At this point, a draft pick can't really help the Rockets anyway. When you're talking about teams with championship aspirations, there's nothing that a rookie's going to do to help you unless you're talking about a Magic Johnson.
Now, let's toss it back to First Take.
All right, guys, so Eric Gordon says if they had Chris Paul, Houston would be playing in the finals on Thursday night. I was waiting to hear what you had to say about this, both of you. Max, I'll start with you. Do you agree that the Rockets would have won if they had CP3?
Before Max Kellerman answers, because we already know what he's going to say, he's been picking the Rockets for the entire season. I think that it's unfair to ask a hypothetical question like this unless you're also going to include Andre Iguodala in that equation. Now, hypothetically speaking, to answer this individual question, do I think that the Rockets could have beaten the Warriors if Chris Paul was healthy and Andre Iguodala was still out? It's possible. It's possible. They got out to a huge lead in Game 6. Of course, the Warriors stormed back. Had Chris Paul been playing, I think that they would have been able to quell that comeback because he would have slowed the tempo down. He would have been able to control the game a lot better than James Harden was able to do. So I think that they would have probably had a better chance of winning Game 6. I think that they would have won Game 6 had they had Chris Paul and gotten off to that same great start. But had Andre Iguodala been playing the whole series, they would have went down to 5 games. Look at how the Warriors lost Games 4 and 5. They literally lost Games 4 and 5 by a combined 7 points. And they really made a lot of major strategic and execution-based errors down the stretch of both those games that I don't think would have occurred had they had Iguodala. Especially when you have him out there to guard Chris Paul or James Harden. He's truly essential to what the Warriors do, or try to do.
Yes, I do. Now, I get Eric Gordon is not the right thing to say. You're just supposed to credit the winner and everything. And I get I also picked the Rockets, so it sounds like sour grapes.
Because that's what it is.
In neither Eric Gordon's case nor my case do I think that's the case. I think he's just being honest.
Well, I think that he's speaking what people call today his truth. In other words, he's just giving his perspective. And that's what he's supposed to do. He's supposed to look at everything as half glass full. That's what winners do. So that's why he mentioned that you could see it. But as I stated earlier, sometimes just because you see something does not mean that it's meant for you to have in your hands. We can't always grab things that we can see.
And I have to be honest. I think if Chris Paul was there, they win the game. I think it not only because he is their, one of their 2 best players, and in fact, in a big game, I'd probably take him over James Harden, maybe their best player.
To be quite honest with you, I would not have minded if the Rockets had defeated the Warriors just to see Chris Paul and James Harden with a chance on the big stage against LeBron. I think that it would have been a far more compelling championship round. Just to see how LeBron James would have dealt with the physicality of the Rockets, because the Rockets are one of the few teams in the NBA who can go body to body with LeBron. They have a lot of big, strong athletes on their team as well. Just to see PJ Tucker try to knock LeBron around. Of course, LeBron's always going to get his numbers. And with the way that LeBron conditions his body and with the aggressive style in which he plays, he's going to do even more damage to PJ Tucker than Tucker would do to him. But it would certainly give us a chance to see exactly what type of basketball IQ Houston has in comparison to the LeBron James system. We already knew coming into the championship round the LeBron James system cannot beat a team that runs a system like Golden State. He just can't do it. Not even close. Because they're utilizing everyone on their squad.
Under pressure. But I think part of that influence that Chris Paul has on a game is that, no, they don't miss 27 straight threes with him on the floor. Partly because he's taking some of those threes. Partly because he's going to get to the paint when he sees the threes aren't falling and make something happen. You got to collapse the defense getting to the paint. This is something the broadcasters were bringing up repeatedly during the game. But we all know it's still about the painted area, just not a center posting up with his back to the basket anymore. Still got to get there to control the game. Even the spacing and all that stuff to collapse the defense. So Chris Paul would have seen that. He is, as Stephen A. says, constantly a floor general. He would have been the difference there, Stephen A., if they had Chris Paul. But I want to get to an even broader point.
Get to the point about Iguodala. People keep trying to poo-poo what Andre Iguodala brings to the Golden State Warriors. He's very essential, man. He's like a Swiss Army knife out there. He's like a small forward version of Draymond Green, with better ball handling and better passing skills. And he can guard the 1, the 2, or the 3. And he's smart enough to guard a stretch 4. That's what Iguodala can do. Very, very important component of the Golden State Warriors team, Andre Iguodala is. Now, once again, had Chris Paul been playing with no Andre Iguodala for the Golden State Warriors, yes, I think that the Rockets probably win the series, probably. hypothetically speaking, if they were to have gotten out to the same lead in Game 6 that they got out to without Chris Paul, I believe that they would have been able to hold on because Chris Paul would have steadied the ship. I don't see the Rockets allowing a 25-point lead to dissipate that quickly like they did with James Harden as the steward of the Rockets' fortunes if Chris Paul was there. I just don't see that. But, hey, you never know.
There's a difference between heart, which the Rockets showed. The Rockets showed heart last night. They went down, but they went down swinging. There's a difference between heart and will to win. Heart, you can go down swinging, but you know you're going down. Will to win is, damn it, no matter what happens, we're going to find a way. It's not enough just to go out valiantly and keep fighting. We're actually going to win this thing. And I think that's what Chris Paul brings to this team.
Well, it's hard to say that when before this season he had never gotten past the second round. Once again, he's not Isaiah Thomas. He's not even John Stockton, to be honest with you.
A will to win. To win. Not just play hard, but to win. That was missing on the court last night.
You're the same guy that started off the show saying that CP3 didn't really have much to do with 7 for 44 shooting from three-point range. They were just laying bricks.
Well, Stephen A. Smith, he's not going to let all those facts get in the way of a good story.
I said, excuse me, Chris Paul being out and James Harden running the show and having to do all that he had to do and what have you had a lot to do with how they struggled from the perimeter.
It had a bit to do with it, Stephen A., but let's be for real, they got a lot of open looks. They just started to miss. The real problem is that over the course of a series with Mike D'Antoni having such a small rotation, and of course people may say, well, the rotation is small because they had no Chris Paul. That's not really true. It's Mike D'Antoni's job to adjust to the loss of a great player like a Chris Paul by making sure that there are more players in the rotation. Really, before Chris went down, he should have made sure that he had at least one other guy in the rotation. You can't have a 6 or 7-man rotation and beat the Golden State Warriors. You just can't do it. You just can't do it. So many things have to go your way. The Iguodala injury was major for them, as well as Steph Curry's struggles and Kevin Durant's struggles in the middle of the series. That's the reason why they were able to go up 3-2. A lot of things were going their way. When those factors were no longer as large as they were in the middle of the series, when Curry started to play a little bit better, when Durant finished the series out in Game 7, you saw that very, very small rotation that D'Antoni was using came back to bite them because they had no legs in the second half of Game 7.
Fought me for the first 20 minutes of the show on that point, and now you've conceded that Chris Paul being out may have influenced why they were shooting the way that they were shooting. Now let me tell you this. They wouldn't have won anyway, in my opinion. They wouldn't have won. Of course, it's always a mischaracterization for you because you're always all over the place. And then when I call you on it, oh, we don't know. Because you got to remember, America, listen to what America needs to understand. Max Kellerman is never wrong. He's either right or we simply have the inability to comprehend. He can't possibly be wrong. Can't possibly be wrong.
Okay, never mind.
Just like you backed the Rockets to win the series. You weren't wrong about that. You weren't wrong about that either. Do you know that I'm staying in Houston? I'm staying in Houston because Houston's playing Game 1 of the Finals Thursday night, according to Max Kellerman. I mean, far be it for you to be wrong. I mean, this is what it is. Now let me say this to you. CP3, they wouldn't have won anyway. I think it would have been an entirely different game. I think that CP3 being out is what had the Golden State Warriors rattled at the very beginning. Because when you know they're without him and you're fresh off of the second half explosion in Game 6 where you outscored Houston 64-25, I think you came up in there not living true and up to your identity.
Well, here's the problem with that theory, Stephen A. Smith. That would have made more sense had Chris Paul's injury occurred in Game 6. Then you could say, well, they were rattled for Game 7. They were truly unaware of the verve that Houston was going to be playing with. But Chris Paul was injured at the end of Game 5. And Golden State played even more poorly at the beginning of Game 6 than they did at the beginning of Game 7. So we can say, maybe Golden State thought that Game 6 was going to be an easy victory, so they didn't bring the intensity that was necessary in Game 6. But Game 7, that excuse does not does not work because they already knew that Chris Paul was going to be out again. Point being is this, the Rockets played very hard. They played very desperately in Game 7. They had a great home court advantage. The crowd was into it. And Golden State had to adjust, which they did. Kudos to them. Kudos to their great players, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant. And Steph Curry saved their butt in the third quarter of Game 7.
You got a bit lax. You got a bit careless. You got a little bit anxious. And you played out of character. And ultimately, you had to be reminded of who you are because Steve Kerr had to do that for you. And I think that the steady presence of the Sean Livingstons of the world to some degree, and obviously Steph Curry playing the way that he played, and Kevin Durant being more reliable and not being asked to play with his back to the basket, all of those things help. It definitely would have been a different kind of game, which David West and others admitted after the game. It would have been a different kind of game if CP3 had played. And they probably would have had to do something a little bit different or a little bit more extraordinary in order to win the game. But I think in the end, Golden State would have found a way. If you remember, that was one of the things that I said. If everybody's healthy, with or without, I said, I don't care who it is, Golden State's going to win, even if it's a Game 7 at the Toyota Center.
Well, I agree with that as long as Golden State would have had Iguodala. If all hands were on deck for both teams, yes, I believe that Golden State would have won Game 7 in Houston.
And I think that's what we saw happen. I just find CP3 would have changed things to some degree, but not the outcome, in my opinion.
Look, I think he would have changed the outcome, but I will point out one way in which I'm playing a little bit fast and loose. I think the Warriors got very lucky that not only was CP3 not there, their second best player, maybe their best player in these circumstances, and an MVP caliber player, according to you, Stephen A. I think he missed those 18 games at one, but other than the missed games on a per game basis, he was playing at MVP levels. Chris Paul, he's an all-time great. We get it. It's not just that they were missing him. They also missed 27 consecutive threes. But, of course, the Warriors didn't have Iguodala.
Thank you, sir. It's about time that you mentioned that.
When they really could have used him. So they also got a little bit unlucky. I'm playing a little bit fast and loose there. But Iguodala is...
Kudos to you for admitting that, Max Kellerman, that you're playing fast and loose. Kudos to you.
As much of an impact as he has for the Warriors is not like the impact that CP3 has for the Rockets.
Well, that's debatable. That's debatable. When you have a player like an Iguodala, who you could put on Eric Gordon, you could put him on James Harden, you could put him on CP3. Oftentimes, in these type of scenarios, Andre Iguodala will play 30 to 35 minutes because Steve Kerr trusts him that much. His basketball IQ is that high, his decision-making is that good, and he'll oftentimes make extremely clutch defensive plays. So I think that that's a bit debatable. Of course, we know that Andre Iguodala is most likely not going to go to the Hall of Fame, but he's a player that you would have had to have seen him play to understand how impactful he is because his impact is not going to show on the stats.
The Rockets went from a puncher's chance kind of team last year to this year when they got CP3, a team that was virtually unbeatable during the regular season when healthy. And by the way, at the time of CP3's injury, they were up 3-2 on this Warriors team. Up.
Well, at the time of Andre Iguodala's injury, they were about to go up 2-1. The Golden State Warriors were.
Up 3-2. And he couldn't go at all. Stephen A., I was hoping, maybe he can go well enough at least to put them in the finals. He couldn't even get out there on the court, and then they had the worst shooting performance from downtown in the history of basketball.
Now we know why CP3, when he became the leader of the NBA's Player Association, he demanded that Adam Silver not test for PEDs. He may feel as though he needs performance enhancers just to make sure that his body can stay healthy for the entire season, allegedly.
I think CP3 would have made a difference.
All right.
Okay.
Agree to disagree on that one, fellas. We got a little more to get into. Coming up, Mike D.
But anyway, that's it on this topic in regards to Chris Paul. I'm sure that he's having trouble sleeping. He most likely is not even watching the finals between Golden State and Cleveland because he understands that the team that wins the Western Conference Finals is going to win the championship because I believe that the Rockets would have beaten Cleveland as well. I may have given Cleveland one game, maybe two, due to jitters and inexperience from the Rockets, but the Rockets would have definitely been the better team over the Cleveland Cavaliers. But anyway, peace.